Hello and welcome to today's webinar, How to Choose a Financial Data Platform and Aggregation API Provider. My name is Ron Barish and I'll be your moderator for today. If you have any trouble with the audio or visual portion of this broadcast, please dial 0 for an operator and someone can assist you. For optimal viewing, you can switch to full screen mode with an icon in the bottom right corner of your screen. During the broadcast, feel free to ask any questions in the Q&A panel and the presenters will answer those as time allows at the end of the presentation. This webinar will be recorded and available to you after the presentation. Now, without further delay, I would like to introduce to you our presenters, Chung Tam, Director, API Product Management, and Brian Costello, VP of Information Security at Yodlee. Chung, the floor is yours.
Thanks. Thanks, Ron. So, I just want to kind of talk a little bit about, our Yodlee platform, but, just what are things that are important to a developer, right, when you consider an aggregation API provider, right? So I want to kind of go through is just some kind of things that a developer who is considering on using an aggregation API provider to kind of think about before they make a decision. So the biggest thing that that developer should find important is the data, right? In the end, you need the data to kind of build your applications, and that's actually should be the most important thing that a developer needs to kind of think about when they look for an aggregation API service. The breadth of API offerings, right? Is it just aggregation that the service provider provides, or is there other things that they can provide for you to build a richer app, right? Everything from aggregation, account verification, categorization services, money movement, right? Financial APIs that allow you to build as a developer, rich financial application, right? Experience, expertise, and trust. These are things that you should, the hope is that your provider will have that experience and expertise that can, educate you and guide you, and consult you in building your application. Support, performance, scalability. You want a provider that actually can, scale with you as your app grows, right? As user base gets larger, right? Also provide a certain level of SLA performance, right? So that you have a guaranteed level of service, right? Through the APIs. And also the commitment to developers, right? What is your service provider doing to support developers, right? Not just from a feature standpoint, but also to promote them from a business standpoint. So I'm going to hit on each of these buckets, in the next few slides, and go more into the details on why each of these are important. So, from my experience of talking to a number of our developers, there is an education that needs to happen in terms of how we actually provide our aggregated data to our developers, right? I think to a lot of developers, they think that, oh, well, this is something that, we should be able to consistently get, that there should be, milliseconds worth of latency and everything, right? But in reality, there's actually a lot of intellectual property and a lot of technology in the platform to get the data from the financial institutions and provide it in a consistent API, to the developers, right? So we had a little bit of fun with this particular slide. It does look a little bit like Space Invaders, but there's actually quite a bit of detail here that I like to kind of go over before I talk about some of the considerations about the data that developers should look into, right? The way in the high level of how our aggregation platform works is we have basically army of gatherers which connects with financial institutions either through a direct data feed, OFX connection, web scraping through HTML, or custom connections that we get from the financial institutions. So as a developer, when you call one of our many APIs, right, aggregation, account verification, categorization, money movement, we actually do a lot in the background to kind of get information from the FIs, right, parse it through our data engine, and also store it in our database array before it actually gets to you. Now, I know that's a little bit of a high level in terms of how the platform works, but what that means, I mean, knowing that, we are kind of proxying and gathering that information to financial institutions, to you, I think as a developer, the things that you need to think about are, well, what's the breadth and depth of the connections, that, your service provider provides, right? We at Yodlee, we actually have a number of different data sources, right? We have like over 12,000 data sources, 12,500 and growing. We have a global presence with many different FIs, right? Not just in the U.S., but in Europe, Australia, India, and there is a roadmap to kind of grow your connections, right? So as a developer, this is what I need to kind of think about. I mean, I may be interested in, a target audience in the U.S., but does my data provider actually have a roadmap to kind of grow those connections to other countries, right? Or just grow just number of FI coverage within the U.S. itself. The richness of the data, right, the data quality. A provider may have a connection with, let's say, I don't know, U.S. Bank, Wells Fargo, USAA, but the question becomes, well, how rich is the data, right? What kind of data is the provider returning through the API from the banks, right? Everything from just how much of the account and transaction level details is the API provider providing. What about the scope of the wealth data, right? And wealth is a very interesting area of innovation, where you can provide everything from like stock prices, fees, basis prices, and all that, right? Does your service provider provide that level of detail, right, through the APIs, to you? And lastly, what's the relationship of the service provider with, the financial institution, right? We here in Yodlee actually provide solutions to FIs, so we actually have a very tight-knit connection with financial institutions that we are leveraging to back this API that we're providing to our developers, right? We use a variety of different connection models, right? We don't just scrape information from the site. We have direct relationships, which gets us like direct connections, to the FI. So you have basically a durable connection, through the Yodlee interface. The next thing that should be important to developer after data is the breadth and depth of the API, right? Again, we provide aggregation at Yodlee, but we also provide account verification, right? We also provide categorization, money movement. That richness of API allows you to actually build your service as you grow, right? It's not just by aggregation, but if you want to use, let's say, account verification, does your provider have that, right? And Yodlee is one example where we don't just do aggregation, which is our bread and butter, but we actually do a variety of our different API services as well. These are basically some of the APIs that we have. Again, account aggregation, account verification, categorization, money movement, as well. Next is the the experience, expertise, and trust of your service provider, right? There are, I think, a number of different companies out there, and you have to kind of ask as a developer, how committed are these guys, and what's their expertise in delivering this API, right? As a developer, I want someone who basically have been doing this for a long time, have relationship with like financial institutions, and it's going to be around for for quite some time, right? How many years in business is your service provider, right? Does the provider have kind of like the expertise to not just answer your questions, but also provide guidance in terms of how relationships with FIs work, everything from security aspect to, certain requirements in terms of storing like transaction data and security credentials. And again, is your provider going to be there for you in the long term? Some are stats that I won't go over, but these are basically some of the some of the things that some of the data stats that for us at Yodlee, right? 15 years of experience working in financial institutions. We provide solutions to financial institutions as well, so it is a relationship that is it's quite durable and persistent, right? We have relationships with over 450 financial institutions, right? 9 out of the top 15 banks in the U.S. use our platform, right? And again, 12,500 data sources. Next is the kind of like support, performance, and scalability, right? As a developer, you want a certain level of kind of like performance, service level agreement and everything, right? And you want a provider that's going to constantly be there to monitor kind of like issues with connections with banks and support you 24/7, right? These are some of the stats that we have at Yoli that hopefully articulates just how robust our system and how robust our platform is, right? We have a global presence, so because of that, we have to be diligent in monitoring outages and FIs or outages and connectivity 24/7, right? We have basically about over 27 million API calls to our platform every day, right, for financial APIs. Over 300 developers, right, are using our APIs, right? 5 million unique consumers, right, the end users who log into our platform every day for either PFM solution or account verification or any of our kind of like API services, right? And we are now, half a millisecond, about 1/2 second response time from, you sending a request to us gathering the information, parsing, proxying the information to build a response, to you through our API, right? So these are some of the things that, as a developer, you have to kind of consider, right? Not only is the service provider going to be there for you, but is there a certain kind of level of, service level agreement that they can actually offer you as well, right? Okay. And lastly, and most importantly, actually, is what is the commitment, a service provider has to its developers, right? Are they investing in developer resources, right? Are they making changes in APIs, documentation? What about, are they doing anything to help you as a startup to grow your business and, to help you connect with, financial institutions, consumers, everything, right? And, what's the outreach like? Are they, doing hackathons? What are they doing to help the, developer to really grow their business, right? So, speaking of Yoli, we have actually, a lot of investment in this space. We're constantly evaluating kind of like what we have from developer resources and, looking for ways to kind of like really front load the effort so that the developer doesn't actually have to spend a lot of time integrating to our APIs to get access to our data. Because the data is really the most important piece, of the puzzle that you need to build your application, right? Mentoring startups. Even if you do the integration, is your provider going to go to, to the next step and really try to promote you, right? We've worked with like over 300 developers, and we're looking, so we have a lot of exposure in the space, and we can provide you with a lot of insight as a developer that you may not have, right? Promoting, supporting developers' relationships. Again, Yoli works and provides solutions to financial institutions, right? With that relationship, we can actually bridge a relationship between you as a developer to financial institutions. And lastly, I don't know if you guys have seen it, but we have actually a variety of like different hackathons, events, that not just evangelize our offering, but we want to promote innovation, right, in the financial space, right? We want to help you build the innovative app, not just for finance management, but anything. We can't think of all the solutions, and we want you to actually go out and build it, right? So, thank you. Ron, back to you.
All right. Well, thank you, Chung. That was great. Now I want to hear from Brian Costello, VP of Information Security at Yodlee, for a little bit more about what we need to know regarding our platform security and data privacy considerations.
Thank you, Ron, and welcome, everyone. So as you heard from Chung, as a developer, absolutely you need to select a platform that has the APIs, the support, the breadth and depth of access of data to support your application. But you also need to consider what happens after development is done and you move to operations and actually start deploying your application. As part of your due diligence process for selecting an aggregation provider, you need to understand how do they conduct that aggregation. What is their relationship in the overall financial ecosystem in which you're about to play, and what is the viability of their operations as the market changes and as the regulatory environment changes. So the platform security posture, the aggregation provider's privacy and security data handling capabilities, and their willingness to enter into obligations with you and your regulatory bodies should all factor into the decisions you have before you engage with an aggregator. So let's talk a little bit about why this is important. In the U.S., financial institutions like banks and brokerages are heavily regulated to ensure the safety and soundness of their operations. Now, this started in the 1920s as part of the stability of the government's role in preserving the stability of the financial system. But in the last 20 years or so, consumer protection has become equally as important in the regulatory environment. When you're accessing bank accounts, you're accessing non-public information, or NPI. NPI is defined as any data about a consumer, about your consumer, that they use to obtain or maintain a financial account with their bank, with their brokerage, with their insurance company. So the credentials that you're collecting from them and passing to us certainly is NPI, as is all the data you're getting back. The banking regulators are empowered to supervise any technology and any technology provider that is accessing NPI. So Yodlee has been supervised by the government since 2003, and we are regularly examined for our security, our risk, our continuity programs, as well as our overall management practices. Because of this, we are allowed to operate, as Chung shared with you, fairly seamlessly in the U.S. with the nation's banks and other financial institutions. You should understand this and understand how does your potential aggregation partner play, and if they're not a supervised technology service provider now, can they survive once they show up in the government's radar and have to comply with those laws? Okay. In addition to banking laws, you're accessing consumer privacy data. This is under the oversight of the federal government in the guise of the Federal Trade Commission, as well as every state's attorneys general for issues around consumer data protection and breach notification. So as you look at your application, you look at the data you're collecting, the data you're sharing, and the services you're providing, you need to make sure that your aggregation provider can support you in your obligations and then certainly in their obligations as well. Potentially, you've got some other legal considerations to consider, like healthcare privacy, if your application is bringing back healthcare data or is potentially bringing back healthcare data. Chung talked about the richness of the APIs and the data that we bring back. We don't just bring back quality data, we also assess the data for inclusion in some of these regulatory programs like HIPAA, like FCRA, and can mask that data to de-risk your compliance obligation. Okay. And then finally, if you're accessing credit card data or billing data for credit cards, your application might be required to be PCI compliant. PCI is the payment card industry. This is a standard, not a regulation, but it is required for anybody who is accessing credit card data. Understand how your provider fits into the PCI DSS model, and are they compliant? As your solution grows, and we certainly hope it does, you may attract interest and customers in other countries. While the U.S. has what we call a sectoral privacy model, as we just discussed, you've got HIPAA laws for healthcare, you've got GLBA laws around NPI for finance. Other areas of the world have a much more comprehensive model, and in some cases, consumer data privacy is actually a constitutional right guaranteed to those citizens. So, for example, in the European Union, their current privacy directive is very comprehensive for all of their citizens. And the European Union considers that the U.S. does not have adequate privacy protection to transfer your data on European citizens to the U.S. So if your aggregation provider is U.S.-based, how do they handle this? Can you grow with them into the European Union? There are programs such as the EU Safe Harbor certification. That's the way Yodlee goes. You can adopt binding corporate resolutions, but you as a data controller, enticing the user to provide the data, have the obligations, and you need to pass those on to your aggregation provider as the data processor to make sure that they are upholding your requirements in all of these regions. And there are similar requirements in Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, Hong Kong. They all fall under the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation rules, similar programs there. Make sure you understand, if you anticipate moving into those areas, how your aggregation provider can work. And it's not just the regional overarching rules. Every country has their own laws around banking data, consumer data protection, and especially cross-border data transfer, moving the data out of that country. It's also important for you to understand how your provider hosts the data. Are they holding onto it themselves, or have they engaged with a fourth party, such as a Rackspace or an Amazon or some other cloud provider, in order to achieve the resiliency and scale of their solution? Many of these providers achieve this by using geographic distribution of the data, and they could unknowingly put you out of compliance if they move your data from a US-based data center to a Canadian data center in order to handle a disaster recovery event. So make sure you understand what's behind the aggregation provider's network. An interesting development coming out of Europe, getting a lot of attention in the popular press, is a user's right to be forgotten. Certainly the big guys like Google and Microsoft are dealing with this on the front line. And while this is a bit of a misnomer, people don't have a right to fall off the radar, it does mean that they have a right to control who has access to their data and who has use of their data after they unregister from the service. Make sure that as you develop your app, you've got APIs available to you to help you manage this, like you do with Yodlee. And if you don't select Yodlee, that your aggregation provider can support you in this obligation. Okay. So we've talked a little bit about what you need to comply with. Let's talk a little bit about what to look for to make sure you can comply. So, basic security controls applicable to all of these security and privacy regimes must have encrypted communication channels for all devices. So between your app, whether you're deploying in a browser, a smartphone, or a tablet, you have to have encrypted communication back to the aggregation provider, and the aggregation provider should be collecting their data over encrypted channels. Okay. Sensitive data like NPI, banking data, personal data, has to be encrypted at rest for the entire data flow. So you need, and this is especially interesting when you have a mobile or a tablet solution, because if you're caching any of that data locally, it has to be encrypted as well. Your aggregation provider should have, or ideally will have, APIs to allow you to minimize the amount of data that has to stay on the device, but allowing you to have a nice, fresh user experience, but moving that obligation for data encryption back to your provider. And your provider should offer you a very defense-in-depth, layered approach to good network and data security, consisting of redundant firewalls, encrypted communication channels, and well-managed certificates, well-managed DNS, a hardened architecture across your entire environment that they manage and control. Make sure you ask the questions about those fourth parties. Who's responsible for patching? Who's responsible for vulnerability management? And who's watching the traffic to understand, do we have not only operational concerns because we're growing so fast, we need to scale? Do we have security concerns? We're getting attacked by the bad guys. So you want to have a clear, concise communication back from your provider across all of these things. And then finally, make sure you understand who owns the data, who can use the data, because ultimately you have the obligation to your customers as the data controller to make sure that the data is used appropriately. So does your candidate aggregation provider enter into a contract with you that clearly defines who owns the customer data, what rights do you have to that data to maintain it? What access do you have to that data? Do you have direct access to that data via their APIs to carry out your consumers' wishes? And then what rights does the aggregation provider have to use that data for their own purposes? If it's not clearly spelled out in the contract, if it's not clearly defined in the service level agreements with liabilities and repercussions for non-compliance, we would encourage you to look for another aggregation provider. At Yodlee, we obligate ourselves to our customers across all of these domains to help them satisfy their obligations as well as ours. Ron?
All right. Well, thank you. I wanted to move this to a little Q&A session now, and I suggest all of you participating send us your Q&A questions so we can get to those. I'm going to pull those up right now and see what we got. All right, well, we got one right off the bat. I don't know if you can read that, Brian. It says, what are the security measures you take when we get data from one of your banks via YI? Is it safe and secure?
Basic question, should be on everybody's mind. Absolutely. So when we collect data from a financial institution on behalf of one of your customers, so you've presented your solution to the customer, regardless of the channel, ultimately it comes through an API, we make the request, it's absolutely safe and secure. We are connecting to that data source, to that financial data source over an encrypted channel. We are passing the user's credentials. And a key aspect of consumer-based aggregation is that it is consumer permissioned. All aggregation, all data collection has to be done with the explicit permission of the user. So that's why we need the credentials. We connect on their behalf, pull the data back on their behalf. Behind the scenes, we are encrypting the data in our databases and then present it to you via the APIs. And as I mentioned briefly, depending on the type of data, we're actually masking some of the content to de-risk you and your compliance obligation. And this is consistent through the entire life cycle of data collection, use, storage, and destruction. Perfect.
Thank you, Brian. Okay, Chung, we've got a question here. In regards to the commitment to developers, how is Yodlee and Yodlee Interactive planning to improve the overall developer experience?
That's actually a great question, and I went over briefly earlier that we're constantly looking for ways to kind of like front load the developer experience, right? I won't give timelines, but we're looking at ways to improving our APIs, right? We have a new architecture that we would like to roll out, hopefully maybe by the end of this year or what. That we're looking to simplify, just the integration process, right? Can we create a simpler API that makes sense for developers, right? In addition, we want to look for ways to kind of like improve kind of like the information architecture in our portal, right? So we're looking at a variety of different ways, right? Everything from kind of like an API service level, as well as just developer resources, documentation, sample labs. That's going to help developers minimize the integration experience and hopefully just facilitate the integration so that they can focus on the application and not about getting access to the data.
And as the application is put into production, we are monitoring the application. We're monitoring your use of the APIs from a performance standpoint and providing feedback that perhaps there's another way to code this that you can get faster performance or reduce your data, the data you're getting back to, again, de-risk your posture, as well as monitoring it for security and providing that feedback to you to help you not only use our APIs in a more secure fashion, but potentially your application. And we do certification of FinApps. If you're a FinApp developer, we will actually security and performance certify your app as part of putting it into our store to offer it to our financial institution customers.
Great. Wow. Another question here. For categorization transactions, I noticed you mentioned in the presentation geolocation. When is that going to launch, and what will that look like?
We're actually actively working on that right now, and the hope is that we'll have maybe a preview or a sample of that, later this year in 2014. I won't give out too much of the details, but it's we are looking to, we're providing categorization, with our current transaction API right now, but we have actually, working with a different provider to even provide more information into the transaction level detail, right? So, for example, when you get a transaction, we're going to be providing, at a minimum, the geolocation information, right? So, it's a very exciting product that we're, that we're improving, and I would just say, pay attention and look out for some product release information toward the end of 2014.
Okay. Brian, I love the security questions. Brian, here you go. Can you explain a little bit more about the roles and obligations for a data controller versus a data processor?
Absolutely. So in all of the regulatory and privacy regimes, we have the concept of 3 roles. The data subject is your user. So as an individual, we each have the right to share data about ourselves and expect that it will be protected and used per our specifications. The data controller is anybody who provides an application or a service to the user and asks them for the data. So as you're developing an app, you've got some great ideas, some service you're offering to your customers. You're asking them for their financial data. You are now the data controller. You are enticing the user to provide the data, and you are providing a service for that data. As part of that relationship, you have an obligation to very clearly state what data you need, why do you need it, how are you going to use it, what is the value back to the user of that data, and how are you going to protect that data. So that's that's a conversation about security, as well as who are your partners in this, where will the data go. The data processor is any third party, like an aggregation provider, with whom you engage to deliver the service. The data processor only has an obligation to you as the data controller, not directly to your customer, but that obligation to you has to be fully supportive of your obligations to the user. And that's why you need to have both a rock-solid contract, services agreement with clear expectations, and you need to make sure that as you do your due diligence, that the provider you select is capable of meeting those obligations. Because if they are not, the data processor fails in the obligations, the regulators and the fines are levied against the data controller.
That's big. All right. If there's any more questions, please send those in. I want to thank Brian and Chung for this great presentation. As you've heard today, there's obviously a lot of considerations to take into account when you're looking for an aggregation API provider. I think at the end of the day, we just want to make sure that you're doing your homework and you're doing your company service by making sure all of these interests are in mind when you're looking at a data aggregation provider. In addition, I wanted to sort of talk a little bit about some events we have coming up. If you're interested in talking with anybody at Yodlee or coming out to some great developer events, we do have several coming up. Finovate Fall in September, our FinDever event that we're partnering with Finovate on September 30th in San Francisco, and Money 2020 in November. All of these are available. You can search them online to find out for more information on these events. I'd like to thank everybody and conclude this presentation. You will receive an email in the next few days with a recording of this webinar. If you want more information on Yodlee Interactive and how we can help you take your business to the next level, please respond to the emails that we send out, or you can contact us on our website at yodleeinteractive.com. At this time, I'd like to thank you, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.